scholars have unearthed a thrilling new inscription from Augustan Rome. They were digging in the Forum when they came across a block of stone, a monument inscribed apparently by the Emperor Augustus' own hand. And now that the epigraphists have gotten a chance to decipher it, the translation seems to be something like this. Virgil, are you mad at me? Okay, that's not a thing. Just want to be very clear. There has not been an inscription unearthed from the Emperor Augustus asking Virgil if he's mad. I don't know if you've ever seen the meme where it's Alice in Wonderland and the Mad Hatter says, "We are all mad here." And Alice says, "At me?" For some reason, I always loved that meme. And I kind of imagine Augustus saying this to Virgil if he were alive today. And that's an important point because this question that we are going to address today about whether Virgil is mad at Augustus is in many ways a thoroughly modern question, but it's one we have to address, and we haven't really talked about it in this whole Aeneid series because I've been getting us oriented in the poem and trying to really dig into the ancient concerns of the poem. But now, at the end of Book 6, the climax of this incredible journey through the underworld that we've been following, it's kind of the perfect time to take a good hard look at this modern question, which is, does Virgil really want to celebrate Augustan Rome, the new imperial project that is coming into being and that the whole poem is about in some distant way? Its ostensible subject, its direct subject, is the foundation of the Roman kingdom, really. It's even before the kings of Rome. That's what Aeneas is going to be founding next as we go forward. He's going to be setting up kind of the precursor state that will eventually become Rome's monarchy. But of course, it's all happening in the context of Virgil's day when a new kind of monarchy is being born, a sort of absolute dictatorship that has replaced the Roman Republic after long years of civil war. And for the most part, so far as we can tell, in the ancient world, it was generally understood as obvious that Virgil is writing this poem to celebrate this new age, to bring about and to glorify the project that Rome is now embarking on, to give a new sense of pride and confidence to the Roman people who have just been through this traumatic series of civil wars. If you read Servius the grammarian, who's one of our ancient commentators, kind of late 4th century AD, so quite a bit after Virgil, but still antiquity, he says, as plainly as possible, he says, "Intentio Virgilii haec est." The intention of Virgil is this: Homerum imitari, to imitate Homer, et Augustum laudare a parentibus, and to praise Augustus from or because of his ancestors, right? This seems like a kind of self-evident thing that he just announces at the outset of the commentary. And again, no one seems to have questioned that in any serious way in the ancient world. In fact, if it was easy to question that, if Virgil seemed to be casting aspersions or doubts or was too forthright in his kind of condemnation of Augustus or his questions about Augustan Rome, it would have been big trouble for him. He was very much in with the powerful in Rome. Virgil was not somebody that kept aloof and far away from the centers of power. In fact, Augustus took a very keen interest in the composition of the Aeneid as it was being made. And if this poem had been like a roast of Augustus, it obviously would never have flown. But there is still the possibility, and there's always the possibility, especially in autocratic regimes where one person kind of holds all the ultimate power, there's always the possibility that since you can't criticize the head honcho directly without suffering consequences, you might find ways of doing it in kind of underhanded fashion. You might find ways of sneaking in your criticism that otherwise would be deadly, right? And in the modern era, people have begun to wonder whether Virgil was doing this. And it's interesting that this happened in the modern era because on the one hand, you could say, well, that's because we finally have enough distance from Augustus that we can raise these sorts of questions without fear of reprisal. On the other hand, there were lots of subversive commentaries and revisionist readings up until this point. So it's important also for us to ask, why now? Why in the 20th century, which is really when this kind of thought got going? Why is it that in the 20th century we started to ask, maybe Virgil doesn't actually like Augustus all that much? This is called the pessimist reading of the poem, the version in which Virgil is understood to be secretly critiquing or poking fun of or even just raising questions about the Augustan regime. It kind of gets going with a few really important articles and some books in the middle of the 20th century. There's a 1953 essay called Discolor Aura, Reflection on the Golden Bough by Robert Brooks. There's one by Adam Perry, The Two Voices of Virgil's Aeneid. This phrase, discolor aura, is from the book that we are now reading, book 6, where Aeneas goes down to the underworld. You probably remember that he had to get the golden bough, right? He had to pluck this golden plant that would take him down, pluck from a tree, a branch that would allow him entry into the underworld. And when he finds it, Virgil writes this very evocative line that might have a double meaning, and that's why Brooks chose it. Discolor unde auri per ramos aura refulsit, from which, that is from the branch, from which the eerie sheen of gold suffused the air. That word discolor, which is where we get like discoloration, might seem to suggest that there is a tarnish or a rot or something that Virgil is allowing to creep in here, anxieties about empire and about the end of the Republic that he can't come out and say directly, but that he's encoding cryptically into this poem at every turn. And that's basically the pessimist reading. There's a bunch of different versions of it. There are all sorts of varieties of, shades of nuance of it, but it became more and more popular. And I suspect part of this is because as Americans and as post-war Americans living in the 20th century after the horrors of totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia, after that had become kind of the great evil of the time, it was much harder to look at the Aeneid as this happy, full-throated, unembarrassed celebration of what is basically an imperial project. And as a republic, as an American republic, it's hard for us to love the Aeneid and also accept that it's a poem with nothing bad to say about the end of the Roman Republic, which we, and back to the founders, have thought of the end of the Roman Republic as this terrible calamity, this disaster. And so this moment, which is kind of the central hinge of the poem that we're going to talk about today, is a perfect place for thinking about this, because it's where Aeneas finally meets his father Anchises for one last time. And he's in the fields of the blessed, he's in the plains of Elysium, or rather his shade is, his kind of spirit is in the fields where heroes go to enjoy a kind of rest and luxury before they get reincarnated. And Anchises is going to give Aeneas the final direction that he needs. He's going to basically put the steel in his spine that will lead him up now into the second half of the poem, which is going to be totally different from everything that has gone before. All of this poem up to this point has been about, can Aeneas become the man he needs to become? That has led him to this katabasis, this descent into the underworld. And now it's led him to this confrontation with his father, who up until this moment really was his guiding star, but then when he died, he was lost, and so Aeneas became lost. Now Aeneas is going to take up the mantle. His father is going to give him this new direction forward into the future, and he's going to do it with a prophecy of all the greatness that is to come for Rome. And the speech that he gives basically outlines the whole history of Rome as it actually was, because Virgil's writing from the standpoint where all of this has already happened, but it's history as prophecy, because Anchises is going to present it as a grand plan that is yet to unfold. And of course, that's supposed to inspire Aeneas with all the things that he can get and do, and all the things that his ancestor, or rather his progeny, his descendants will do when he finally accomplishes his task. And so this is Virgil's like potted history of Rome. It's kind of through the mouth of Anchises. It's his take on everything that has happened. And it's a crucial moment, of course, in history for Virgil to be doing this, because up until this point, if you would look back on the history of Rome, you would have to tell it as a steady, gradual development and progress toward the Republic, right? The Republican heroes of Rome would have thought, well, first we had the kings, and there were great kings like Romulus and Numa, but there were also evil kings like Tarquinius Superbus, and that shows the corruption of monarchy, and it all fell to pieces. And in the wake of that, the great founders of our republic formed a more perfect union, if you like, which is an anachronistic American way of putting it, but that the republic was this like great innovation that had been shaped and honed over centuries. Now, the republic has fallen apart, and something new is taking its place, which seems to be an empire. Augustus is fully in power, in control. And Virgil basically has to rewrite the history of Rome so that it all culminates in the empire, which is a very delicate task. He has to honor the heroes of the Republic while at the same time understanding now from this point where he has to act like or convey that he understands actually now it was all leading to this. It wasn't, the Republic wasn't our last straw. The end of the Republic isn't the end of Rome. Actually, now we are embarking on something new and ... glorious? Question mark? And that is the issue that modern scholars have taken up, that they've been so concerned with in these pessimist versus non-pessimist or optimist readings, is does Virgil really want to do what Servius said he wanted to do? Does he want to just praise Augustus to the skies? Does he want to celebrate this new golden age, which is coming into place? Of course, that seems like his goal, but how would we know if he had bad things to say or worries about maybe this isn't just a straight upward trajectory, right? Maybe this is something like a decline, or maybe something has been lost. Is that in the poem too? And so this is where I want us to look at this, because we really haven't talked about it yet, and it's kind of the perfect moment to talk about it as we get to the plains of Elysium. So last week I talked about the geography of the underworld and all the different regions, and I said that we were getting right up to the fields of the blessed. And this is where there's a beautiful kind of tearful reunion between Aeneas and Anchises, father and son. They've both longed for this meeting, and they've needed one another in different ways. And now Anchises is going to kind of lay it all out. He gives a long, long speech with many moving parts and many lovely passages. The first part I find kind of hilarious, because you may remember from last time that I talked about the Platonic view of the underworld, which we get in the Republic. And that view kind of combines a lot of different elements of other views, but one of its central features is reincarnation, that you have this judgment after death, but the judgment isn't really a last judgment, it's more of a purification. You either suffer for your sins or you get rewarded for your good deeds. And after all of that, then you get to choose, there's an elaborate lottery system, and you get to choose a new life, basically. Virgil doesn't quite full on endorse that Platonic story in all of its particulars, but he's definitely influenced by it here. And there's a lot of speculation about what Virgil's philosophy was, because at this time, Stoicism and Epicureanism were kind of competing for people's allegiance. And there's some people that, Virgil did move in some Epicurean circles, and sometimes it seems like there are hints of Epicureanism in some of his work, but this is a place where he's really not being an Epicurean at all. He's being much more Platonist than Epicurean, because the Epicureans thought that our soul just evaporates after death, that there is no consciousness or life or existence after the body falls apart, because they were in this very profound way atomists. They believed everything is made of atoms, and so when the atoms disperse, then there's nothing. On the other hand, a Platonist is much more of an idealist and believes in some sort of realm of immaterial, disembodied entities, that we have a soul, basically, to put it very clearly, and that's what Aeneas is now encountering. These are souls that are moving through the underworld, and they're doing something very like what Plato describes at the end of the Republic. That is, they're getting ready to drink from the waters of Lethe, of forgetfulness, before they go back up into the world. And what's funny about this to me is that the grace note Virgil adds through Anchises is basically all the good guys are now going to go and become Romans. So for Plato, and Socrates, the ideal after you'd lived a good life and you'd studied wisdom and so forth was to go back as a just man into the world and to learn to choose justice. But for Virgil, the highest reward of any life you can live, the highest blessing after the best kind of virtue is to become a Roman, right? To go forward and either become a hero of the Republic or a hero of the Empire. So this is the kind of thing that makes people think, what are you, crazy? Like, obviously, this is a patriotic poem. This is a poem about like Rome first, right? There's like nothing but sheer like boo-rah, Rome is awesome, kind of coursing through the veins of this poem. However, of course, it's more complicated than that, right? So what happens next is after Anchises has said, like, all of these good guys basically are going to go make the good guy state. They're going to go create Rome. He embarks upon this long and grand story of all the different people. And there's different kind of heroes from different eras of Rome that we recognize. And we move through the monarchic period, the period of the kingship, and Romulus and so on. And then we move through the rebellion and the foundation of the Republic and all the stuff that we get in Livy. Then finally, the culmination of it all, the pinnacle of it, is going to be Augustus. Because Augustus, remember, is related to Aeneas via his son, Ascanius. There's some kind of ambiguity about this, and there's a little bit of uncomfortable speculation that goes on about which Iulus was it that created the Julian line and so forth. But in this version of the story, there's a definite line of descent from Aeneas and, via Aeneas from Venus, the goddess Venus, all the way down to Augustus. And this is going to be the culmination of everything that has gone before. However, it's at exactly that climax point when we should be kind of soaring to a crescendo of ecstatic delight about all of the wonderful things that Augustus is going to do and the new peace that is going to reign after he founds the empire and so forth. It's exactly this point that the most confusing and ambiguous kind of issues arise. The first thing to note is that Anchises gives this sort of almost qualified or backhanded celebration of what it is to be a Roman that I think is actually a perfect example of something I've emphasized a couple times, including in the mailbag last time about this poem and about Virgil, which is that Virgil is really aware of his place in history. And he wants, I think, to be proud of Rome, and he wants to celebrate Rome, but he wants to celebrate Rome as it is, that is, as this new thing that is not the same as the glories of the past. And so it is true, as Servius says, that he imitates Homer, for example, in this poem. Obviously, there are many, many allusions throughout to the Odyssey and the Iliad. But it's also true that Virgil is keenly aware that he can't be Homer because he's not, first of all, a singing oral poet. He's not living in archaic Greece. He's a written poet. And he's living in Augustan Rome. And so he has a totally different context, a totally different set of concerns, a totally different kind of style. And the glories of the past are lost forever. That's the point of the opening vignette of Aeneas' journey, which is the burning of Troy, right? That there's a lot that has gone before that was grand. Like these heroes of the misty legend and the Trojan Wars and all of the things that we love in Homer, the kind of romance of this God-haunted world. That is not the world that we live in anymore. Now we're writing poems, now we're living very much in history. And Rome itself has always had this anxiety that it can't be Greece, that Greece has created this wonderful art and poetry, and there's this incredible flowering of the golden age of Periclean Athens and all this stuff. And Rome has a deep admiration for that. And as soon as Rome kind of makes contact with Greek culture, there's this real amazement and admiration for everything that Greece has done. And at the same time, there's a lot of suspicion and a lot of resentment because the Romans are a different kind of people. They think of themselves as more plain-spoken, more agrarian, more simple. They don't have the elaborate fancy words of the Greek. They're Greeks. They're even suspicious of Greek philosophy, that maybe it's going to corrupt the youth and make them spend time contemplating the good life instead of fighting and dying for Rome and doing their duty, right? And Aeneas himself has lots of things that he might like to do, right? Lots of kinds of people he might like to be. He might like to stay and be the king of Carthage with Dido. He might like to kind of just go off and cultivate a quiet, homely patch somewhere near the ruins of Troy. But he can't. He has to be the person that history and fate has determined him to be. He has to be the founder of Rome. And so the whole celebration that Anchises gives of Augustan Rome is like, it's not like this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. It's that this is the greatest thing that is happening now. It's the thing that our moment needs most. And there's a famous passage that we should start with, because this is where I think we really get the sense of melancholy that comes in along with the patriotism, is when Anchises says, and I'm translating here as always for you, my own Alexandrine lines from the Latin. He says, "Others will mold the breathing bronze with softer touch, I'm sure, and coax out living faces from the marble." Who do you think that is, right? Who's good at molding breathing bronze and coaxing living faces? It's the Greeks, right? It's them Greeks. Plead their causes better, so that's Greek rhetoric. Chart the heavens' motions with a staff, that's Greek astronomy and the kind of mathematical genius of the philosophers, but it's also even the Eastern empires, the Chaldeans and the Assyrian kind of stargazers who knew so much about science and the natural world, predict the rising of the stars, right? So he's saying all these other empires and peoples and civilizations, especially the Greeks, right? Like not to mention the Greeks, whom he never calls out by name here, but who are clearly the key comparison case, right? All these other empires are going to do other stuff better than you. It's going to be their glory to mold the breathing bronze with softer touch, coax out living faces from the marble, plead their causes better. I'm sure, credo equidem, I don't doubt it, right? There's like a degree of just kind of acceptance here. But remember, your dominion, Roman, is of nations. These will be your arts. Impose the ways of peace. Show mercy to the conquered. Crush the proud in war. These are very famous lines. In fact, it's hard to think of lines from the Aeneid that are more famous than these, and they're famous also in Latin. Romane memento, hae tibi erunt artes, pacis quimponere morem, parcere subjectus et debellare superbos, crush the proud in war. He's saying what? He's saying the Greeks were great at rhetoric, they were great at philosophy, they were great at stargazing. Some of the other empires, like the Eastern ones, were also quite skilled in many of these arts and disciplines. What's the Romans' kind of specialty? What's the superpower of being Roman? It's to rule the world. It's to conquer all these other places that are now in need of leadership and guidance. And the thing that is coming into being is specifically suited to this moment, to this Virgilian moment when everyone is sick of disorder and chaos and civil war. What's the thing that Romans are good at doing? It's justice. It's establishing law and order. And I think this vision of what Rome is and what Rome should be, which was so appealing probably to Augustus, whose whole kind of PR campaign, whose whole project was about law and order, it was so appealing to Augustus. This is exactly the thing that made modern readers so anxious and made people especially in America and to some extent also in Europe in the second half of the 20th century, gave us the heebie-jeebies. It was like, this is like kind of fashy, right? Like this is like a little totalitarian. And maybe we should kind of call into question, if we love Virgil so much, if he's such a sensitive artist, like how can he be all in on this project? Now, there's a version of this, a caricature, or maybe just an extreme of the pessimist view that I think is really ridiculous. And it goes something like this. Ooh, nice artsy Virgil could never have celebrated mean, gory war, right? There's a certain modern incredulity at the idea that a great, sensitive, clearly sophisticated artist like Virgil would devote his talents to uplifting this violent, oppressive regime, right? And that, to me, just doesn't hold any water at all. It's clear that people in the ancient world did not have the same anxiety about this. And you can see why they wouldn't, because in fact, somebody does need to keep the peace, right? Somebody does need to keep order, especially in a world where you don't have lightning fast international trade and you don't have like the global spread of democracy and all these things that have kind of defined the modern world and made it in many ways softer and nicer. Industrial technology, like, of course, there are costs and drawbacks to all this stuff too. But one thing it's done is it's made us very, very spoiled when it comes to kind of order. We have this idea that order just comes in magically out of nowhere, but in fact, the peace always has to be kept by somebody, and especially in the ancient world, peace had to be kept. And so this idea of Rome as the just rulers, right, dealing out either violence to those who were resistant, who threatened the world order, or mercy to those who were going to be incorporated into the world order, right? That is actually a positive vision. And to me, there's no doubt in my mind that Virgil is trying to offer that as an art on an equal with Greek rhetoric and Greek arts and the achievements of all these other civilizations. He's saying other civilizations have these glorious achievements. This is ours, and it's just as glorious. In fact, maybe even it is the ultimate glorious achievement to be able to bring peace to the world through violence if necessary, but ideally through mercy, which was one of Augustus' big things, was his clemency, his clementia. So I don't think you can take the pessimist reading so far as to say, like, why, Virgil would never be in favor of empire. Like, no, he was. But there is still a question, and the questions get more and more acute as we're going to go along here, whether he thinks that there are no drawbacks or no costs to empire. And I also think it's crazy to say that Virgil, just because he does ultimately want to find a way for Rome to be proud and to be confident in itself, he wants to do that the way an artist wants it, which is to say honestly, right? And if there's one thing that Virgil is throughout this entire poem, down to his bones, it's a realist. To me, the realism of the poem, not the realism, of course, of like, there are actually three-headed dogs running around, but the realism, the moral realism and the maturity of this poem is what makes it a great work of art rather than just a piece of propaganda. And in order to plausibly and convincingly celebrate Augustus, Virgil also had to find a way of allowing for the things that had been lost. Because everything, as I've said many times on the show, everything is a trade-off, right? Even good regimes come with costs and come with loss. And history itself, as it develops, may bring new things that are good, but it also brings new things that are bad. It never gives with both hands, right? There's always kind of a loss and a gain. And ultimately, the gain might be greater than the loss. You might say Virgil thinks it's totally worth it. I think Virgil does think it's totally worth it. C.S. Lewis felt that Virgil's main point was that, yes, this cost a lot, but it was totally worth it. All the same, if he hadn't acknowledged the costs fully, then he wouldn't have been able to plausibly say that it was worth paying those costs. So what are the costs? What are the things that are lost? Well, lives, of course, individual desires, right? We've seen the ways that Aeneas has to give up the stuff that he might like to do in order to do the stuff that he must do. And there's a strong ethos in this poem throughout that the part of the Roman kind of moral fiber is giving up things that you might personally want in service of the grand endeavor of the state of Rome. So that is lost. But the other thing that is lost, right, is the Republic. And this was, up until this point, the glory of Rome, this republican constitution, not a written constitution like ours is, but the way of life and the set of rules that governs the land has lasted for almost 500 years. So basically twice as long as our American Constitution has lasted so far. And now it has crumbled and fallen apart. And in the process, there were many people who said, this is the end of Rome. I would rather die than live on in a Rome that has been transformed into something unrecognizable, like an empire. And of course, because they had expelled the kings in order to make their republic, just like we expelled a king to make our republic. The whole point of the Roman Republic was no kings, right? Much like those protests that have been going on. And this is a longstanding American tradition. It was very much a Roman idea. We will never bend the knee to a king, right? Romans are free. And so for Romans now to have to understand themselves as lords of the world, but also subjects of an emperor, is a radical cognitive shift, a huge national revision of the story. And Virgil is keenly aware that that's not made up. That's not nothing, right? He's trying to find a way to acknowledge, to make space for and room for the fact that the Republic has come to an end. And whether we might wish that it could be reconstituted and whether we might feel that the empire is much worse, right? We can feel that this is a worse thing. And at the same time, one of the things Virgil is saying is what we can't do is resurrect the Republic. We can't bring that back into being. I think that is kind of the undercurrent of a lot of this stuff in especially book 6 about Roman, these are your arts, right? Is like, you have to accept what the moment requires. You have to accept where you are in history. And by the time Virgil is writing, it's true that, as Kamala Harris said, we're not going back, right? There are actually debates recorded from the life of Augustus when, contemporaries and people slightly after Augustus started recording his life. They would stage these debates between his closest advisors, like, Maecenas, his culture minister, and Agrippa, his great general. And they would sort of say, well, should we try to refound the Republic? And the argument in those debates that always carries the day, even outside of Virgil, is you can't undo it. You can't turn the clock back, even if the Republic was better. The Republic has now fallen apart, and the structures and the pressures that made that happen are not going away. In fact, we've lost that moment. It's now gone. And so we have to be content with that and make the best of this imperial moment. But we also have to mourn everything that has fallen apart. We have to mourn the burning Troy, right? The fallen past, the life we have known. And I think that Virgil very subtly and cleverly does all of that in this next passage that I want to read, which is also a famous passage, although not so much in the modern world, but in the ancient world, this was one of the most famous passages. And it's the soul of Marcellus. Marcellus, you've probably never heard of unless you are already a big Aeneas head. But this was the moment that Octavia, Augustus' sister, fainted when she heard this moment, because this is a moment in praise of the very recently dead nephew of Augustus, son of Octavia, and many people thought future heir of the empire. And watch what Virgil does here, because it's so subtle the way that he both praises this lost son, he makes him into the pinnacle of Roman virtue, while also raising a bunch of really uncomfortable questions about what's going to happen now that he's dead. So remember that we're still in this Anchises speech. He's looking at all these blessed souls that are going to they have the privilege, the honor of becoming Romans, right? And he says, basically, Aeneas asks, like, who is this darker shade that doesn't get to see the light? And he says, this is the one that was so virtuous, the gods were envious, and they didn't let him come to full manhood. And then it leads up to this climax, which is where it said Octavia fainted. He says, O piety and ancient faith, O strong right hand and undefeated, no one could have faced him down and got away unscathed, not if he marched on foot or spurred his frothing steed against the enemy. Oh, pitiable boy, if only somehow you could break the surly bonds of solemn fate, you'd be Marcellus. Give me lilies by the handful. Let me scatter purple blossoms for the soul of this my progeny. Fulfill my offices at least this far, and pile high, though impotent, these gifts. And so they wandered over fields of air. They swept across the far-flung plain, beheld it all. That's kind of the climax of this whole thing, right? It's been building up to this Augustan celebration. He does it in this very artful way. These are your arts. You're going to rule the world. It's going to be great. It's going to be just like the Greeks. But we end actually with this note of grief. And it's so powerful when he gets to that line, you would be Marcellus. If only you could defy your fate, you would be Marcellus. That's where Octavia is said to have fainted. Why did she faint? And why did Virgil read this portion? Well, it's said that Augustus took a very keen interest in the creation of the poem. And this is in the lives, the biographies that we have of Virgil, one of which is by Suetonius. At the turn of the 2nd century AD, Suetonius was this historian who wrote a bunch of biographies. He was the imperial secretary, so he had access to all of these archives and letters and so forth. And he tells us that when Augustus was away on his Cantabrian campaign. This was a war he was fighting in Cantabria, which is in Spain. He demanded and entreated and even jokingly threatened in his letters for Virgil to send him something of the Aeneid. And he says he wants a draft or a section or whatever. And not long afterward, when the material was at last in shape, Virgil read him 3 books in all, the 2nd, 4th, and 6th. That's the one that we're reading now. The 2nd is the flight from Troy, you'll remember, and the 4th is Dido and the great dramatic love story. And this is the climax of what he read to Augustus, to the empire, when he got an imperial audience. This is what he read. The last of these produced a remarkable effect on Octavia, who was present at the reading. This is Augustus' sister, remember, for it is said that when he reached the verses out about her son, "Thou shalt be Marcellus," she fainted and was with difficulty revived. This was very, very fresh. The death of this boy, if we think about the Cantabrian campaign when Augustus makes the request, that's 25 BC. And at that point, it looked a lot like Augustus was grooming his nephew, this boy Marcellus, Octavia's son, for the future, to be the next emperor, that this was going to be now the line of succession. And Augustus kind of denied that. There were other candidates, including Tiberius, who eventually did become the emperor. This was Augustus' stepson by Livia Drusilla. But it seemed pretty clear that he was grooming an heir and a spare, right? That there was Marcellus, who was going to be shown in, he was taken on the Cantabrian campaigns. He was elevated to positions that were kind of above his station. He was, given political power much earlier than he was supposed to. There were elaborate games in his honor. And then Tiberius, seemed like maybe he was one of the other options. Another candidate was Agrippa, the great general, who kind of fell out with Marcellus because Marcellus was so clearly seemed to be the favorite for the inheritance. But this raises the whole issue of, well, we've only had one emperor, right? Remember, Julius Caesar was not an emperor. He was dictator for life. And Octavian was his adopted son, who's now Augustus. What's going to happen next? Are we going to elect our emperors? I mean, we've never done this before. Are we going to have a right of succession? Is it going to be primogeniture? Is it going to be what? And so Marcellus seemed like the answer to that question, and there were profound hopes placed in him, which is why Virgil makes such a big deal of his virtue, right? This was the beautiful hope of Rome until in 23 BC, first Augustus and then Marcellus himself fell ill with a terrible illness. Augustus, during this time, gave his signet ring to Agrippa. So it's real court intrigue hours now. This is everyone is waiting with bated breath. Is the emperor going to die? And is Agrippa going to be the next guy? Or is it going to take a kind of weird left turn? Is it going to be Agrippa until it's Marcellus? Or what's going to happen? Thankfully for everyone involved, they breathe a sigh of relief because Augustus recovers. And so the question of the succession is sort of delayed for a while. And however, Marcellus does not recover. Marcellus dies of the illness at Baiae, which is this famous kind of resort town, which means that all of this is fresh in the memory for Octavia, of course, who has lost her son, but also for Augustus and also for all of Rome. This was the simplest choice for the succession. And it was also one that many people seemed to be hopeful about. And now everything seems to be in question. So at the same time as Virgil is doing huge honor to Augustus as the pinnacle of Roman history, really, and to his presumptive heir, he is also acknowledging these enormous unanswered questions and fears that everyone must have, right? What is going to happen now that the guy who seemed like the obvious choice for the next emperor is gone? Are we going to have more civil wars? Are we going to have palace intrigues? How are we going to decide the line of succession? There's even lines like, no boy of the line of Ilius shall so exalt his Latin ancestors by his show of promise. Nobody else can fill this role that Marcellus filled, right? Romulus land will never take more pride in one of its sons. This is really clever language, and it's very subtle language because it is an enormous act of praise for Augustus and his family and so forth. Also, it's like, oh, nobody else? Really? Like, well, that's a problem. Yeah. I mean, there's some real fears and questions being raised about the challenges of empire that don't come along with the republic, right? Republics don't have this problem of people fighting for succession to the one role that holds all the power. They have other problems. But Virgil is saying, like, now we've got a bunch of new problems to deal with. It's not like smooth sailing from here on out. And if you ask me, right, am I a pessimist about this or what? Do I think Virgil is trying to undermine and subvert the whole imperial project here? I think Virgil is better than that. I think Virgil is smarter and subtler than any of his interpreters on this point, because it's already too facile and too anachronistic to ask, does Virgil think empire is a good thing or a bad thing? Does Virgil like Augustus? Is he mad at Augustus or what? Right? He's giving you everything. He's giving you a poem big enough to contain the real glory of the new Roman imperial project and all of the costs that come along with the loss of the Republic. He's saying the Republic is over. There's no going back. Empire is here. Augustus is our guy. We're going to get behind him. And at the same time, we're going to get behind him with clear eyes. We're going to mourn what has been lost. We're going to leave Troy behind, but we're going to miss it. And it's going to bring new problems, terrible issues, concerns. But now we have our direction. And that's what's so genius about it is that now Aeneas has his direction, right? Aeneas is now shown the way forward. Even if there are open questions still on the table, he can now become the hero of the Iliad. He's been the wandering, lost hero of the Odyssey. Now in the rest of the books, he's going to become the hero of the Iliad. That is the warrior fighting to found his city. But before he goes, that one last big, ambiguous, strange thing is going to happen. On his last moment, as he journeys out of the underworld, we have to talk about the Gate of Horn and the Gate of Ivory. So if there's any passage that pessimists like to cite, that any pessimist must cite, it's this one. It's this one and the very last passage of the poem, which we'll do when we get there. But this is the big one, and I find this passage just riveting and haunting and strange and difficult. There are two gates out of the underworld, right? Aeneas is ready. He's on his way up to the great hero, right? He's got the wind in his sails. He's going to go. He's accepted. He's grieved the past. He's taking the future by the horns. And we're so exciting. And then Virgil hits us with this, okay? Here's the passage. Sleep's portals are a pair, of which the first is said to be a gate of horn, the easy exit route for truthful shades. The other one is ivory. Its sheen is flawless, but it issues lying dreams and sends deceitful spirits to the open air. When Sibyl and his son had reached these gates, Anchises sent them with these words up through the ivory. Virgil will just drop that and move on. This is what's so great, is that it's not even made a big deal of, really. This is part of the mythology. It's not something Virgil invented. We're going to get to that. But it's a huge moment. The Gates of Horn and Ivory have their own Wikipedia page. That's how important they are mythologically. And you can see why, right? Because there are these two gates. Dreams come out from the underworld, the world of shadows and non-being, into the world of life. That's what dreams are, right? They're a connection to kind of everything beyond this present life. Some dreams are false. Some dreams don't tell the truth, and some dreams do. The true ones go through this rough-hewn kind of unassuming gate of horn because it doesn't look like much, but it's the truth. And then lies come with gilded ivory, right? The lying dreams, the dreams that aren't going to come true, the things that won't be fulfilled, go through the gate of ivory. And that's the gate through which Aeneas now about to found Rome, now about to create the conditions that will lead to Augustus, with all of Anchises' words, right? With the words that the whole prophecy that Anchises has just made about the future of Rome goes up through the gate of false dreams. What did he mean by this, right? Why does that happen? And if you're a pessimist, the answer is clear, right? This is Aeneas' ultimate pipe bomb that he's just thrown. It's a grenade that he's thrown over his shoulder as he walks away from this beautiful vision of the future of Rome. This is like Beyonce in that video where she like blows up a car and then just struts away. Like this would be that for Virgil if you're a pessimist, right? This is like, yes, it's all very beautiful and glorious and glittering. Augustus himself was said to have boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and made it into one of marble. Marble's very shiny, so is ivory. It's all beautiful, but it's all a lie, right? So this is the strongest case, I think, for the pessimist reading is like, all of this has basically been a vanishing bubble and a dream. But not so fast. You may recall, if you've been a long-time Young Heretics listener, these are the rewards of following the show for a long time, is that we did the Odyssey way back when, right? We did it as part of our long series on Homer. And I said then that we were going to get in time to the Gates of Horn and Ivory in Aeneas. Why did I say that? Because the Gates of Horn and Ivory show up first in the Odyssey. And if you remember this, I don't know, you get like extra credit or something in the grand Young Heretics quiz. This is when Odysseus has returned home. It's book 19 of the Odyssey. And Penelope has a dream, a true dream, that prophesies that he's home, that tells her her husband is back at long last. And the point of that story is that Penelope is so dejected from her long years of waiting, so despondent that she's forgotten how to hope, and she won't believe even the true dream that comes to her. And so she says this, dreams are opaque in their meaning and hard to pin down in the form that they come to us, never fulfilled in full among men. They come to us through two portals, twin gates for elusive dreams. One pair of gates is made out of horn, the other of ivory. As for the ones that pass through the gates of sculpted ivory, they evade us. The claims they bring with them are never borne out. So this is the same idea, right? But as for the ones that pass through the doors made of sanded horn, they are born to fulfillment. And there's a pun in the Greek between the ivory and evasion, right? And horn. And being born out, right? There's puns that I've sort of captured in the English, but the main point here is that, like, you know, horn sounds like fulfillment and ivory sounds like evasion. In Greek, they sound much more like each other. But the whole episode is the key point of the whole episode is that Penelope is wrong, right? It's not a false dream. It actually isn't too good to be true. It's really happening. So one possibility here is that Virgil, always two steps ahead of us, is giving us a double fake out. He's saying like, oh, it was all a false dream, right? But if you go back to the original, you'll realize that actually, no, wrong. It's not a false dream. It's a real dream. It's true. It's not too good to be true, right? The other thing is that this is our last great look back at the Odyssey itself, right? Because from this moment on, from this very instant of the twin gates, we're going to transition into the Iliad. We're going to be recreating the Iliad rather than the Odyssey. And so the other possibility that's, I think, very real here is that the dream that is evaporating, the false dream that's going away now, is everything that's gone before. Not the future that's about to come, but the past that Aeneas has been stuck in, which is the past of the Odyssey, the past of wandering, the past of trying to get back home, trying to get back to Troy, right? He's letting all of that go now and it's evaporating. And of course, it's fitting that it would happen with this reference, this one last callback to the Odyssey via the idea of the deceitful dream. So what's so mind-blowing to me about this is that at the same time as Virgil is giving us this kind of huge and capacious picture of the good and the bad, all that is won and all that is lost when you build a great civilization like Rome, he is also throwing in this like 12D chess, this one image that is like an Ouroboros, like it goes back in upon itself, or a Mobius strip, right? It's like every time you interpret it, that interpretation leads you to another opposite interpretation. You start by saying, well, this is obviously pessimistic because it's a false dream. Wait, but the false dreams come from the Odyssey, where they actually turn out not to be false. And actually it is false, but it's the false is in the past and not in the future. But maybe it is in the future, because this is like, you can go on with this forever. And I think that Virgil ultimately means us to be doing that. That's the point. Not that this is good or that it's bad, but that it's impossible to untangle the ways that it is good and bad. And in this one image, he sort of makes it impossible for us to land on a neat answer to that question, because Rome, as it is in this moment, is neither good nor bad. It just is. It just is what must be. And our duty is to serve it as best we can and seek the best good thing that can be had in the present moment. It's such a mind-blowing. I just love this moment because of the way that it can't ever be boiled down, and because it refuses to allow us to be comfortable in either like unquestioning patriotism, like without it refuses to allow us either comfortable patriotism or comfortable pessimism. Right? It gives us the reality of the world as it is and forces us to make our own moral choices within that world. And that is what Aeneas is now going to be forced to do, is he has to man up and say, yes, there are all sorts of trade-offs, all sorts of difficulties, but what the important thing is to act. Right now, he's going to have to go and do the great endeavor. And at long last, we will get there next time. We're going to pick up with book 7, and we will be kind of heading now, not exactly on the home stretch, but we've turned the corner. We've gone through this grand journey. I've had so much fun. I hope you have too, on this journey through the first half of the Aeneid. The second half is different in structure, and so we're going to deal with it a little differently. I'll talk about that next time as well. But we are definitely kind of making our way now toward the grand conclusion and the final deliverance and the ultimate success of the Virgilian and the Aenean endeavor. But first, it figures. I really like this segment. I hope you do too. This is where we get to talk about figures of speech and ways in which the language of the poem itself contributes to its meaning, not just with the meaning of the words that Virgil is saying, but with the sound of the words, the placement of the words. Everything is very carefully chosen. That's one of the good things about being a written poet, is that you have kind of endless control, and literally until you die, in Virgil's case, you can keep tinkering and moving words around. And there were developed theories and systems and sciences for understanding some of the techniques that poets and rhetoricians can use. As always, I'm talking here about the way these terms get used in poetry. If you want to study rhetoric, it's slightly different, but this is the version that you'll learn if you're studying poetry specifically. And there's one figure of speech, one type of rhetorical or verbal gesture that we obviously have to talk about. There's an obvious shoe-in candidate this week, and that is apostrophe. Apostrophe is not the punctuation mark, not in this case. It's not the little thing that makes it possessive or what have you. It is rather from that same root, apostrophe, a turning away or a turning aside is what it means in Greek. And it's a direct address. So that it's the poet saying you to somebody, addressing somebody directly, but specifically somebody who is dead or absent or unlikely to respond in some way or another. And this is why he turns away from the main subject and from the present reality and addresses, oh muse, right? Oh, you lost souls of the dead, right? Oh, you great soldiers who fought in war. That's apostrophe. And it, like all of these, once you see it, you'll see it everywhere. But in particular, you will see it in moments of extreme pathos, when the poet really wants to confront you with the sorrow of something, with loss, with a sense of distance. Ironically, by breaking the fourth wall, right, kind of turning to the camera and addressing somebody who is gone or about to be gone. Ironically, that creates a sense of more palpable distance, right? It's like we feel more deeply that the person being addressed can't respond. And so the classic epic example of this is from the Iliad, and it's when Patroclus in book 16 goes to his death. This is the kind of beloved friend of Achilles, goes to his death, and Homer, that is the narrator of the poem, turns and says, "Oh, Patroclus, oh, you, Patroclus," right? Went to your death, etc., etc. "Oh, my horseman," right? And that moment is very rare for Homer's narrator. He tends to be impassive and impartial, so it means a lot when he steps out and, again, breaks the fourth wall, addresses Patroclus directly, and that makes us feel all of the pain, right? It hits us in the feels, right? That's kind of what apostrophe does. And Virgil has all of this in mind, I am sure, I don't doubt it, when he achieves the effect that ultimately made Octavia faint. And the moment that made Octavia faint is another great example of apostrophe. He's been building up to this whole thing. He said, "Oh, pitiable boy," when Anchises is talking about like this great virtuous man, "Oh, strong right hand and undefeated. No one could have faced him down and got away unscathed." And then suddenly, hell, miserande puer. And that miserande in Latin is in what's called the vocative case. So unlike in English, nouns in Latin change their shape depending on their role in the sentence. And we know because it's miserande and not miserandus or dum or whatever, the de means that he's talking now to the boy. The puer could be either nominative, it could be the subject, or it could be an address. But because it's miserande, we know that he's now addressing, "Oh, you miserable boy." And then the next line, which is very cleverly kind of enjammed onto the start of a line, "To Marcellus Eris, you will be Marcellus. If only you could break the bonds of fate." So this is like, we're so close. We're almost touching, right? We could have had him. An illness took him away from us, right? The chance of history and the sort of slippage, these little things that slip, and the high stakes in an empire of the line of succession suddenly being broken like that. And we feel the personal, the private tragedy of it, and the national tragedy, right? The tragedy for Rome that they had this scion ripped away from them, this heir ripped away. It's all done with this very, very calculated use of apostrophe, which draws on that earlier use from Homer, right? We know that when an epic poet turns and addresses a dead or an absent or a dying person, which is what he's doing here, right? Marcellus is dead in real life and he's in the underworld. In the poem, we know when that happens, we're going to expect something intense, and it clearly delivered since Octavia fainted, right? So that's apostrophe, that's it figures, and now you will probably see it everywhere. So you're welcome. All right, one last thing, and that is the mailbag. Mailbag questions come to me through Substack at rejoiceevermore.substack.com. I've been getting a lot of good mailbag questions lately. Thank you for that. Please do become a subscriber. It really is the best place to engage with my work, and it's where I post most everything that I do at rejoiceevermore.substack.com. I think you will enjoy the essays that I write there and some of the extra stuff that I offer for subscribers. And you can write and ask me questions. I've had a couple questions lately that I'm going to combine now into one, all about translations of the Odyssey. And I thought today would be a good time, because we talked a little bit about the Odyssey. It'd be a good time to talk about how to pick a good translation. And it's interesting. I don't know. I think a lot of people seem to be interested in reading that right now. There's a big movie of it coming out that I will surely review when it comes, by Christopher Nolan. And I'm interested to know if you are one of these people who are now interested in reading the Odyssey. Why now? Why this specific poem? But great. Like, I love it. And I love, especially some of you have written in to say that you got inspired to read it because of the podcast. And that warms my heart. So a lot of people have asked, like, what's the best translation? How do I pick, et cetera, et cetera. I used to do a series on this. It was called Words, Words, Words. I am writing a book kind of about a lot of these issues right now. I don't have time to do the Words, Words, Words anymore at this moment. So I figured it would be useful just to kind of re-up this topic in the mailbag, specifically related to the Odyssey, and kind of review a few things and just give you some tips for what are the things to watch out for. I'm going to give you the headline first so that you can just take this away. The best translation is Robert Fagel's. Go get the Robert Fagel's translation. I think it is undefeated, and you won't go wrong. It's reasonably accurate. It's very beautiful. It's almost cinematic in how vivid it is, and it has a really, I think, elegant and interesting way of dealing with the meter of the poem, with the rhythm of the poem, which is hard to capture even harder, I think, than Virgil, hard to capture in English. It's this dactylic hexameter that I've talked about so many times on the show now. And it's in Greek, it's really is a rhythm. That is, it's a beat, not just a stress pattern. It's andra moi enne pemusa polutra pon hosmalapola, hosmalapola, plankthea pe troiesieron toliethron epersen, right? There is like this da 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 beat going on the whole time, and there are artful things happening with which kind of beat is used in which line, and we won't get into all the different possibilities there at this time, but just to say, like, you have to find some way of capturing that steady rhythmic pulse that also has variation in it. And the closest analog to it is iambic pentameter in English. And by that I mean, in English, when we write epic, we write it in iambic pentameter, which is a slightly different rhythm. It's da 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 da. And that's the rhythm of most of Shakespeare. It's the rhythm of Milton, right? It's basically all kind of heroic verse and grand stories and epic poetry in English has that pulse. It little profits that an idle king by this still hearth among these barren crags matched with an aged wife, right? There's this sort of like stately progression. So you can do that. And the most recent and most celebrated, maybe not the most recent, but the most celebrated translation of the Odyssey is Emily Wilson's, and Emily Wilson does do iambic pentameter. I'm going to get in a moment into my dissatisfactions with Emily Wilson and why I don't think you should get her translation. But first of all, let me just read to you my translation of the opening of the Odyssey, because that will give us a kind of baseline of what I think the lines basically mean, right? And I translate Homer, unlike Virgil, whom I translate with Alexandrines, which are in iambic meter. I translate Homer with more of a loose 5 to 6 beat line that tries to replicate the sort of pulse of dactylic hexameter in English. It's a little more complicated and less structured, but I think kind of gets at the hairiness of Homeric lines, which is different from Virgil. Anyway, here's how I would translate it. Tell me, Muse, about a man of many ways and wanderings after he sacked the citadel of Troy, the many towns he saw, and how he came to know the minds of all the many men that lived there, how his heart was wounded many a time at sea, straining to gain his life back and bring his comrades home. So famous opening has this famous word in it, polutropos, which I've translated as many ways and wanderings. The way I translate it goes over onto a second line, so it's kind of twisty and difficult. Now let me read you Emily Wilson's version, which is in iambic pentameter. Tell me about a complicated man. Muse, tell me how he wandered and was lost when he had wrecked the holy town of Troy, and where he went and who he met, the pain he suffered in the storms at sea, and how he worked to save his life and bring his men back home. There are some interesting and in some cases good choices here. I like wrecked as wrecked the holy town of Troy with this kind of double meaning of shipwreck, right? I don't like complicated for polutropos, and this has been a very hotly debated translation choice on social media. If you are on X or Twitter, you can hear people arguing at great length about why this is a good or a bad choice. You can make some arguments for it, but frankly, I just think it is too bland and too modern. And this is, to me, Wilson's great flaw, is that she has this philosophy about deflating the epics, that they wouldn't initially have felt like these grand, elevated, archaic pieces. They would have been vivid and modern and real. And all of that is true. And yet, since very early on, including in antiquity, it's been understood that Homer's style is remarkable and difficult to imitate and translate because it is both direct and muscular and punchy and grand, right? And has this kind of elevated epic solemnity to it. And I think that Wilson just totally loses that by making everything so pedestrian. And this especially is true of her Iliad, but also of her Odyssey. If you want to know more about that and why I don't think you should read the Wilson translations, I do have a review of them in the Claremont Review of Books called Homer Without Heroes. I will link to that. But if you're looking for an Odyssey translation, you're going to hear a lot of people talk with breathlessly about Emily Wilson. I don't think she's the one for you. I think it's Fagles. And Fagles is the one that has been kind of, before Emily Wilson, Fagles was kind of the cause célèbre. Then he got kind of he fell out of fashion as this like, you know, fusty white man, but really his translation is actually does what Emily Wilson thinks she's trying to do. Like, it is very comprehensible and clear and muscular and powerful, but it also has this just to me very soaring kind of rhythm and tone to it. Slightly different way that he deals with the meter. He says, "Sing to me of the man muse, the man of twists and turns." Man of twists and turns is great for Polytropos, right? Complicated is like I was dating him and he was a little complicated, right? That feels just kind of dismissive. But man of twists and turns is perfectly ambiguous. Driven time and again off course. Once he had plundered the hallowed heights of Troy. Many cities of men he saw and learned their minds. So there's a little bit of kind of anachronism or elevation there. Many cities of men he saw, right? But it doesn't feel too fusty. It doesn't feel too thumping. And learned their minds. Many pains he suffered, heart sick on the open sea, fighting to save his life and bring his comrades home. So I think that's just like hard to beat. You know, eventually we'll probably need a new one because language changes, but I don't think Fagles, there's any reason to give up on Fagles at this point. Honorable mention goes to Richmond Lattimore, whose Odyssey I read as a 12-year-old. The very, very first like grown-up book I ever read was Richmond Lattimore's translation of the Odyssey. I think it still holds up. It's from the 60s. Tell me, muse, of the man of many ways who has driven far journeys after he had sacked Troy's sacred citadel. Many were they whose cities he saw, whose minds he learned of, many the pains he suffered in his spirit on the wide sea, struggling for his own life and the homecoming of his companions. You'll note there's like more there. So some poets, especially I think older translators, have a little bit more freedom to like add stuff. I don't know. The translation theory was a little bit more loose, perhaps at the time. And so that's the only reason why I don't love the Lattimore as much as the Fagles is I feel like there are more liberties. There's liberties in the Fagles too, and you have to take liberties and you have to give, like, the famous thing is translations are either beautiful or faithful, right? So you have to, you know, give some leeway and you have to try to make the poem feel the way it felt and not just mean what it meant. But the guy that really, to me, goes overboard on that is Robert Fitzgerald. This is also from the 60s, and it feels like it's from the 60s. Sing in me, muse, and through me tell the story of that man skilled in all ways of contending, the wanderer, harried for years on end after he plundered the stronghold on the proud height of Troy. I mean, we are really off the beaten path here. We've left the reservation. Sing in me, muse, andra moi enepe musa. So far as I know, the dative can't mean that in that way. So this is really an interpretation. There's like ideas being inserted here into the poem. He saw the townlands and learned the minds of many distant men and weathered many bitter nights and days in his deep heart at sea while he fought only to save his life to bring his shipmates home. Some nice moments, but very free. And then, of course, the ultimate in free translations, but also in perhaps beautiful translations, is Alexander Pope's. This is from 1725 and thereabouts. He published it in installments, I believe. But this is in couplets. So it rhymes. Every other line rhymes. It's A, A, B, B, C, C, et cetera, et cetera. And to do that, you really do end up having to add in stuff to fill in the line and take a lot more liberties. Pope took, I think, even more liberties than strictly necessary, but he did come up with some beautiful stuff. So it's sometimes fun to read and still worthwhile. It's a beautiful poem in its own right. The man for wisdom's various arts renowned, long exercised in woes, O muse, resound, who, when his arms had wrought the destined fall of sacred Troy and raised her heaven-built wall, wandering from clime to clime, observant strayed, their manners noted and their states surveyed. On stormy seas unnumbered toils he bore, safe with his friends to gain his natal shore. This is, to me, more a great work of 18th century English literature than a great work of translation of archaic Greek literature. You can argue to what extent archaic Greek literature would have felt to Greek listeners like 18th century English poetry. I think the distance is far enough, at least for us, that this doesn't quite count as like a really solid translation, but it's certainly a beautiful work of art and worth reading, worth checking out. But finally, first prize ultimately still goes to Fagles. Fagles remains undefeated for me. I'd love to hear if there are others I didn't mention. You can drop a note in the comments, translations that you really like that are worth consideration. But I hope that helps all of you who are writing to me for translations of the Odyssey. And as always, it's a joy to be with you. Thank you for following me on this grand journey, this grand adventure. Don't forget to rate, review, share, subscribe wherever you are listening. If you could please just sign up so you never miss an episode, that would be awesome. It really helps me, and I hope you too, to get each new installment as it comes. Check out my book, Light of the Mind, Light of the World, Illuminating Science Through Faith. And I will see you next time for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters.